a crisp morning in September 1976, archaeologist Dr. James Peterson stood frozen at the entrance of a newly discovered cave in the Caucasus Mountains. Before him lay something that would challenge everything he thought he knew about human history. Carefully preserved in the dry mountain air were the remains of what appeared to be human bones, but of extraordinary proportions. What we found that day wasn't just unusual, Dr. Peterson would later write in his field journal. It was impossible by every standard we knew. The skeletal remains, carbon dated to approximately 3000 BCE, belonged to individuals who would have stood between 7 and 8 feet tall. Even more intriguing were the ancient inscriptions on the cave walls, depicting tall, majestic figures interacting with ordinary humans. The writings, in an ancient Semitic dialect, contained references to what scholars would later connect to the mysterious sons of God mentioned in Genesis 6. Among the many enigmatic passages in the Bible, perhaps none has generated more scholarly debate than the opening verses of Genesis 6. These verses describe a mysterious interaction between beings called sons of God and the daughters of men, resulting in offspring who became mighty men of renown. This brief narrative, nestled between the account of Adam's lineage and the Great Flood, has puzzled religious scholars and historians for millennia. The Hebrew text, in its ancient simplicity, opens a window into a world where the boundaries between the divine and human seemed more permeable than we typically imagine. The passage appears in what scholars consider one of the oldest sections of the biblical text, predating even the organization of the Israelite monarchy. Its preservation through centuries of oral and written tradition suggests its profound significance to ancient Near Eastern understanding of human origins and divine interaction. The enigma of Genesis 6 raises several profound questions that have challenged theological and historical scholarship. Who exactly were these sons of God? Were they, as some ancient texts suggest, members of a divine council? Or were they, as later interpretations propose, simply the righteous descendants of Seth? The identity of these beings connects to even deeper questions about the nature of divine-human interaction in the ancient world. The text suggests that these encounters resulted in offspring of extraordinary status, mighty men of old, men of renown. What are we to make of these descriptions? Furthermore, the placement of this account immediately before the flood narrative raises questions about its significance. The text indicates that after these events, the Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth. What connection, if any, exists between these mysterious unions and the corruption that led to the flood? These questions touch upon fundamental issues of human nature, divine boundaries, and the relationship between the physical and spiritual realms. They also raise important considerations about how we should interpret ancient texts that describe events outside our modern framework of understanding. To understand the Genesis 6 passage, we must first consider its historical context within ancient Near Eastern literature. The text emerged during a period when similar narratives about divine-human interaction were widespread throughout Mesopotamian cultures. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, for instance, we find tales of divine beings interacting with humans. The Sumerian king list describes rulers of extraordinary lifespans and abilities, often claiming divine parentage. These parallel accounts suggest a common cultural understanding of a time when the divine and human realms intersected. The Hebrew text, however, presents distinct differences. While neighboring cultures celebrated these divine-human unions, Genesis appears to present them as a transgression of established boundaries. This negative view is further emphasized by the text's placement just before the flood narrative. The historical period described would have been during the pre-flood era, roughly 10 generations after Adam, according to biblical genealogy. This was a time the text characterizes as one of expanding human civilization, when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, suggesting a period of significant population growth and cultural development. The Hebrew phrase, Bnei ha-Elohim, sons of God, merits careful linguistic analysis. In biblical Hebrew, this term appears in several other contexts, notably in the book of Job, where it clearly refers to divine beings who present themselves before the Lord. The same construction is used in Psalms 29:1 and 89:7, consistently referring to heavenly beings. The term daughters of men, Benot Ha'adam, presents its own complexities. The Hebrew Ha'adam can refer either to humanity in general or specifically to Adam's lineage. This ambiguity has led to centuries of debate about whether the text describes a distinction between divine and human beings or between two different human lineages. The description of the offspring as Giborim, mighty men, and Anshe Hashem uses terminology found elsewhere in ancient Hebrew texts. The word Giborim often describes warriors or heroes of exceptional strength and ability, while Anshe Hashem suggests individuals of great fame or notoriety. Perhaps most intriguing is the term Nephilim, which appears in this passage. Its etymology is disputed. Some scholars connect it to the Hebrew root naphal, while others suggest connections to the root meaning to be extraordinary or distinguished. The same term appears later in Numbers 13:33, describing the inhabitants of Canaan, suggesting its meaning was well understood in ancient Hebrew culture. The syntax of the passage itself is straightforward Hebrew narrative, but its brevity and the unique nature of its subject matter have generated extensive commentary throughout history. The translation history of Genesis 6:1-4 reveals how understanding of this passage has evolved over time. The earliest major translation, the Greek Septuagint, renders Bene Ha-Elohim as angeloi to theo, suggesting the translators understood these beings as divine or angelic. The Aramaic Targums, important Jewish translations and interpretations, show interesting variations. Targum Onkelos uses B'nai Ravravia, while Targum Jonathan chooses Ne Diania, both appearing to avoid direct divine implications. The Latin Vulgate translates the phrase as Filii Dei, maintaining the literal Hebrew meaning while leaving room for interpretation. This translation significantly influenced Western understanding of the passage through the medieval period. Modern translations show further diversity in approach. King James Version 1611 maintains sons of God, preserving the ambiguity of the original. New International Version offers sons of God, with a footnote explaining alternative interpretations. Jewish Publication Society translation uses divine beings, reflecting traditional Jewish understanding. Some modern translations, like the Good News Bible, opt for sons of heavenly beings, attempting to clarify the supernatural element. These translation differences reflect not just linguistic choices, but theological interpretations. The challenge of translating this passage lies not in linguistic difficulty, but in capturing its full implications in various cultural contexts. Archaeological evidence related to the Genesis 6 narrative comes primarily from ancient Near Eastern sources. The discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls in 1947 provided significant insights, particularly through the Book of Giants fragments found among them. These texts elaborate on the traditional narrative, offering detailed accounts of the interaction between divine and human beings. In Mesopotamia, excavations have uncovered tablets containing the Epic of Gilgamesh and the Atrahasis epic, both featuring parallel accounts of divine-human interaction and a great flood. The Sumerian king list, discovered at multiple archaeological sites, describes rulers of extraordinary lifespans, echoing biblical themes. At Ugarit in modern Syria, archaeologists uncovered texts describing divine councils and beings called sons of El, providing cultural context for understanding similar biblical terminology. These texts date to approximately 1200 BCE and demonstrate how widespread such concepts were in the ancient Near East. Egyptian archaeological finds include papyrus texts referring to semi-divine rulers and beings of extraordinary stature. The Turin king list, though fragmentary, presents a similar pattern of legendary rulers with extraordinary attributes and lifespans. Physical evidence includes monumental architecture from various ancient sites that prompted ancient historians to attribute their construction to giants or divine beings. While these structures demonstrate advanced engineering rather than supernatural origin, they reflect ancient perspectives on extraordinary human capabilities. The earliest historical documents commenting on Genesis 6 include writings from Jewish historians and early church fathers. Flavius Josephus, writing in the 1st century CE, provided one of the first detailed historical analyses in his Antiquities of the Jews. He interpreted the sons of God as human beings who had strayed from divine virtues, reflecting an early rationalistic approach to the text. The Book of Enoch, though not considered canonical by most traditions, represents a significant historical document dating from the Second Temple period, around 300 to 200 BCE. Its detailed elaboration of the Genesis narrative became highly influential in early Jewish and Christian thought, as evidenced by its citation in the New Testament Book of Jude. Early Christian writers provided extensive documentation of how the passage was understood in their time. Justin Martyr, 100–165 CE, and Irenaeus, 130–202 CE, both wrote detailed commentaries accepting the supernatural interpretation. Their writings show how the early church wrestled with these difficult texts. Medieval Jewish commentators, including Rashi, 1040–1105, and Maimonides, 1135–1204, left substantial written analyses. Rashi favored interpreting sons of God as referring to nobles or judges, while Maimonides approached the text from a more philosophical perspective. The discovery of Babylonian and Assyrian tablets in the 19th century provided historical context through parallel flood narratives and stories of divine-human interaction. These include the Gilgamesh epic and Atrahasis epic, both preserving ancient traditions similar to the biblical account. The narrative of divine beings interacting with humans appears in various cultural traditions worldwide. In Greek mythology, the concept emerges in stories of the Olympian gods and their relationships with mortals, producing heroes like Hercules and Perseus. These tales, recorded by Homer and Hesiod, share thematic similarities with the Genesis account. Ancient Mesopotamian traditions, preserved in cuneiform texts, speak of the Anunnaki, divine beings who interacted with humans. The Epic of Gilgamesh describes its protagonist as 2/3 divine and 1/3 human, reflecting similar themes of divine-human relationships. Egyptian mythology contains accounts of the gods walking among humans during a golden age, with pharaohs claiming divine parentage. The concept appears in hieroglyphic texts and temple inscriptions throughout ancient Egyptian history. In Norse mythology, the prose Edda describes interactions between gods, humans, and giants, presenting a complex hierarchy of beings. These tales, though recorded later, preserve older oral traditions about supernatural beings interacting with humans. Hindu traditions, particularly in the Vedas and Puranas, describe various classes of divine beings interacting with humans. The concept of avatars, divine beings taking human form, represents another variation on this theme. Native American oral traditions, particularly among peoples of the Pacific Northwest, include stories of a race of giants who preceded human beings. Similar motifs appear in Aztec and Inca mythology, suggesting the universality of such narratives. Theological interpretations of Genesis 6 have evolved significantly through history, with two major theories dominating scholarly discourse. The first, known as the angelic view, dominated early Jewish and Christian thought. This interpretation understands the sons of God as divine or angelic beings who left their proper domain to interact with humans. The second major interpretation, the Sethite view, emerged prominently with Augustine of Hippo in the 5th century. This theory suggests the sons of God were the righteous descendants of Seth, while the daughters of men were from Cain's corrupted lineage. This interpretation gained widespread acceptance in medieval Christian theology. Jewish theological tradition offers additional perspectives. Medieval scholars like Rashi interpreted the sons of God as nobles or judges who abused their authority. Other Jewish commentators understood the passage as describing the corruption of human leadership rather than supernatural intervention. Eastern Orthodox theology maintains a unique perspective, viewing the passage as describing a fundamental breakdown in the proper order of creation. This interpretation focuses less on identifying specific entities and more on the theological implications of boundary transgression. Modern theological scholarship has revived interest in the supernatural interpretation, particularly through the work of scholars examining Second Temple period literature and its influence on New Testament understanding. Historical and anthropological research offers several approaches to understanding the Genesis 6 narrative within its ancient cultural context. Archaeological evidence from the ancient Near East shows that stories of exceptional rulers and heroes were common literary devices used to explain significant cultural developments. Anthropologists note that ancient societies often attributed unusual physical or intellectual capabilities to divine parentage. This pattern appears consistently across cultures, suggesting a common way of explaining exceptional human achievements or characteristics. Linguistic studies of ancient Near Eastern texts reveal that terms like sons of God and mighty men often served as political or social designations rather than literal descriptions. Similar terminology appears in diplomatic correspondence and royal inscriptions from multiple ancient cultures. Historical records suggest that ancient societies often used divine descent narratives to legitimize ruling dynasties. The Egyptian pharaohs, Mesopotamian kings, and other ancient rulers commonly claimed divine parentage to establish their authority. Cultural historians point out that the Genesis account may reflect actual historical conflicts between different social groups or civilizations, with supernatural elements added as part of the traditional narrative style of ancient historiography. The Genesis 6 narrative reflects complex social and cultural dynamics of ancient societies. Historians note that the text emerges from a period when hierarchical social structures were becoming more defined in ancient Near Eastern civilizations. In Mesopotamian society, the concept of divine human relationships often represented the interaction between ruling elites and common people. Marriage alliances between ruling families and local populations were frequently described using religious or mythological language. Cultural anthropologists observe that the theme of boundaries between divine and human realms appears consistently in societies transitioning from tribal to urban structures. The narrative may reflect social tensions during periods of rapid cultural change and urbanization. The description of mighty men and men of renown parallels how ancient societies recorded the emergence of powerful ruling classes. These terms appear in various ancient texts to describe military leaders, city founders, and cultural heroes. Ancient Near Eastern marriage customs provide important context. The practice of powerful rulers claiming multiple wives from among the general population was common, often described in semi-mythological terms. This social reality may underlie the basic narrative structure. Literary analysis reveals how such stories serve to preserve cultural memory of significant social changes. The text's placement before the flood narrative suggests it marked a crucial transition in how ancient peoples understood their relationship with divine authority. Modern scholarly interpretation of Genesis 6 continues to evolve through interdisciplinary approaches. Historians and archaeologists examine the text within the broader context of ancient Near Eastern literature and cultural practices. Contemporary biblical scholars increasingly focus on how this narrative functioned within its original historical context. The text appears to address fundamental questions about human identity and limitations that remained relevant throughout ancient cultures. Anthropological research reveals how similar narratives in other cultures often marked periods of significant social change or cultural crisis. The Genesis account may preserve memories of important transitions in ancient Near Eastern society. Literary analysis shows how the passage uses common ancient Near Eastern motifs: divine councils, exceptional heroes, and divine human interaction, while presenting them in a distinctly different theological framework. Modern research into ancient Near Eastern languages has provided new insights into key terms. Recent studies of Ugaritic and Akkadian texts offer parallel uses of phrases like sons of God and mighty men in political and social contexts. Historical analysis suggests the narrative may reflect actual cultural memories of significant historical changes, preserved through generations of oral tradition before being recorded in written form. The Genesis 6 narrative continues to influence contemporary culture in significant ways. In literature, authors regularly draw upon these ancient themes when exploring questions of human nature and divine interaction. Classical works like Milton's Paradise Lost extensively develop the narrative's themes, influencing generations of writers. In academic circles, the passage generates ongoing discussion about how ancient societies understood their relationship with the divine. Scholarly journals regularly publish new analyses examining the text's historical and cultural significance. Recent archaeological discoveries continue to provide new contexts for understanding the narrative. Religious communities interpret this passage differently, reflecting various theological traditions. Orthodox Jewish commentators generally maintain traditional, rabbinic interpretations, while modern Jewish scholars often approach the text through historical critical methods. Christian denominations vary in their approach, from literal to allegorical interpretations. The story's themes appear in contemporary art and literature, though often recontextualized for modern audiences. Museums worldwide display ancient artifacts related to similar narratives from various cultures, demonstrating the universal appeal of these themes. Modern historical research continues to uncover parallels in other ancient cultures. Recent translations of previously unknown texts from the ancient Near East provide new comparative material for understanding how such stories functioned in ancient societies. The narrative remains significant in discussions about human identity and limitations, particularly in religious and philosophical contexts. Its themes of boundaries, authority, and human-divine relationships continue to resonate in contemporary ethical debates. The Genesis 6 narrative raises enduring ethical and social questions that remain relevant to contemporary discussions. The text addresses fundamental issues about boundaries, authority, and moral responsibility that continue to resonate in modern ethical debates. The story's emphasis on boundaries between different realms of authority has implications for understanding social hierarchies and power structures. Ancient societies used such narratives to establish and maintain social order, a practice that historians note parallels modern societal structures. The ethical implications of the narrative extend to questions of leadership and responsibility. The text presents a scenario where those in positions of power, whether interpreted as divine beings or human rulers, transgress established boundaries, leading to social corruption. This theme remains relevant in discussions about leadership ethics and social responsibility. The narrative's connection to the flood story raises questions about collective responsibility and judgment. Ancient societies often used such accounts to explain catastrophic events and establish moral frameworks. Modern interpreters continue to examine how societies understand collective responsibility for social corruption. Gender dynamics in the narrative have drawn increased scholarly attention. The portrayal of daughters of men reflects ancient attitudes about gender and power, providing material for analyzing historical social structures. Modern scholars examine how such texts influence the development of gender roles in various societies. The text's treatment of marriage and proper relationships between different social groups remains relevant to discussions about social boundaries and cultural integration. Anthropologists note how ancient societies used marriage regulations to maintain social order, a practice that continues in various forms. Questions of identity and heritage raised by the narrative parallel modern discussions about cultural preservation and integration. The text's concern with maintaining proper distinctions between groups reflects ongoing debates about cultural identity and assimilation. Modern scholarship continues to examine how this ancient narrative influenced the development of legal and ethical frameworks in various societies. The text's emphasis on maintaining proper order and boundaries influenced the development of both religious and secular legal systems. The analysis of Genesis 6 reveals several key points that emerge from historical, theological, and cultural studies. First, the text represents a unique narrative within ancient Near Eastern literature, sharing common motifs with other cultures while presenting distinct theological perspectives. The various interpretations of the text, from early supernatural readings to later naturalistic explanations, reflect changing approaches to ancient texts throughout history. Both the angelic and Sethite views maintain significant scholarly support, each offering insights into how ancient societies understood divine-human relationships. Archaeological evidence and historical documents demonstrate the widespread nature of similar narratives across ancient cultures. The discovery of parallel accounts in Mesopotamian, Egyptian, and other traditions suggests common cultural memories or experiences underlying these stories. Literary analysis reveals sophisticated narrative techniques used to address fundamental questions about human nature and divine boundaries. The text's placement before the flood narrative suggests its crucial role in explaining moral deterioration in ancient understanding. The enduring influence of this passage on religious thought, cultural expression, and ethical discussions demonstrates its continuing relevance to human self-understanding and social organization. The Genesis 6 narrative continues to hold significant relevance in contemporary discussions of human nature and social boundaries. Its examination of power, authority, and moral limits resonates with modern ethical debates about leadership and social responsibility. Academic study of the text provides valuable insights into how ancient societies understood and explained significant social and cultural changes. Modern scholarship continues to uncover new perspectives through archaeological discoveries and comparative literary analysis. The narrative's themes concerning proper relationships between different social groups remain pertinent to current discussions about cultural integration and preservation of identity. Its treatment of boundaries and authority continues to inform religious and philosophical debates. Religious communities continue to find meaning in the text's exploration of human limitations and divine interaction. The passage raises enduring questions about human nature and moral responsibility that remain relevant to contemporary theological and ethical discussions. Several important questions remain for future scholarly investigation of the Genesis 6 narrative. Archaeological research continues to uncover new texts from the ancient Near East that may provide additional context for understanding this passage. Linguistic studies of ancient languages may reveal new insights into key terms and phrases used in the text. Ongoing translation work on recently discovered ancient manuscripts could offer fresh perspectives on how these terms were understood. Further historical research is needed to better understand how this narrative influenced social and legal development in ancient societies. Questions remain about how different cultures adapted and interpreted similar stories. Anthropological studies may reveal more about how such narratives functioned in maintaining social order and cultural identity in ancient communities. The relationship between this text and parallel traditions in other cultures deserves continued examination. The chronological development of the Genesis 6 narrative and its interpretation spans several millennia. The original oral traditions likely emerged in the ancient Near East during the early development of written records. By the 3rd century BCE, the Greek Septuagint translation provided the first major interpretation of the passage, rendering sons of God as angels of God. During the 1st century CE, Jewish historians like Flavius Josephus offered detailed commentary on the text, while early Christian writers such as Justin Martyr and Irenaeus developed their interpretations in the 2nd century. A significant shift occurred in the 5th century CE when Augustine proposed the Sethite interpretation, which became dominant in medieval Christian thought. The discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls in 1947 provided new insights through ancient manuscripts, including fragments of the Book of Giants. Throughout the 20th century, archaeological discoveries across the Middle East continued to uncover parallel narratives in various ancient cultures, enhancing scholarly understanding of the text's historical context. Recent academic work has focused on integrating insights from anthropology, linguistics, and comparative religious studies to better understand how this narrative functioned in ancient society. The fundamental sources for understanding the Genesis 6 narrative include the Hebrew Masoretic text, the Greek Septuagint, and the Dead Sea Scrolls. Primary historical interpretations come from Flavius Josephus's Antiquities of the Jews, Philo's philosophical works, and early Christian writings by Justin Martyr and Irenaeus. Medieval Jewish commentaries by Rashi and Maimonides provide crucial rabbinic perspectives. Augustine's City of God presents the influential Sethite interpretation. Essential archaeological sources include Mesopotamian texts like the Epic of Gilgamesh and Atrahasis, discovered at sites in Iraq and Syria. The Ugaritic texts from Ras Shamra provide important linguistic and cultural context. Modern scholarly works include extensive studies in academic journals of ancient Near Eastern studies, biblical archaeology, and comparative religion. Anthropological research on ancient cultural practices and social structures offers additional contextual understanding. Key terms in the Genesis 6 narrative require specific historical and linguistic context. B'nai Ha-Elohim, sons of God, appears in Hebrew texts referring to divine council members or heavenly beings. Benot Ha-Adam, daughters of men, uses the term Ha-Adam, which can reference either humanity in general or Adam's specific lineage. Gibborim describes mighty warriors or heroes in ancient Hebrew usage, while Anshe Hashem, men of renown, refers to individuals of great fame or notoriety. Nephilim remains a debated term, possibly derived from the Hebrew root nafal, to fall, or related to extraordinary status. The Sethite view refers to Augustine's interpretation of the sons of God as Seth's descendants. The angelic view represents the early interpretation of divine beings. Second Temple period designates the historical era between 516 BCE and 70 CE, crucial for understanding Jewish interpretative traditions. Thank you for joining us on this fascinating exploration of the Genesis 6 narrative. If you found this analysis enlightening, please take a moment to share your thoughts and perspectives in the comments below. We value your insights and would love to hear your interpretation of this ancient text. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more in-depth historical and biblical analyses. By subscribing, you'll help support our ongoing research and content creation. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like. It helps others discover this content. Share this video with friends and family who might be interested in ancient texts and historical analysis. Together, we can build a community of thoughtful discussion around these fascinating historical narratives. We look forward to bringing you more compelling content about ancient history and biblical texts.